Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Ambrose Blofield back here again for the Sales Mastery Company. And today we are talking about situational leadership. Now, I believe from my experience in the last 19 years of coaching hundreds, if not thousands of sales managers and business owners around the world in many, many countries, that situational leadership is rarely taught to sales managers. And I think that is such a shame because I believe that sales leadership or sales management is arguably the most challenging of all of the management responsibilities. Such is the pressure and the heat, if you like, or possibly even the competition and conflict within the sales team itself. Now, I'm going to share with you the actual slide in terms of the copy of the workbook right now. If you haven't got a copy of this already, please send through an email through to admin@salesmasterycompany.com and request Situational Leadership Made Easy, and we'll get a copy to you straight away. But for now, if I've got your attention, stay with me, make a few notes, think about your team in particular. So if you're a sales manager, I've really geared today's topic for you. But if you lead a marketing team or you're a business owner, you don't know what situational leadership is, then please stick around because I think this is going to be useful for you as well. On the second page of the workbook, we just got a brief welcome and a brief overview of ourselves. The key thing to be aware of, as I mentioned before, is we've been coaching and training businesses in over 25 countries over the last 19 years around the world. It's a humbling privilege to do so. And I'm sharing with you just a snippet of the leadership training that we do, both in our sales academy and in other sales manager training that we offer. So when we think about situational leadership, it was developed, as it says there, by Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard. Ken Blanchard's very famous because along with Spencer Johnson, he wrote the 1 Minute Manager, and this was kind of the next thing that he really worked on. And particularly this topic, which we refer to nowadays as situational leadership, because it's about leading in the situation with the person in front of you. It was called lifestyle of leadership before, and situational leadership sounded more catchy. So in part, that was a motivation for them to change the topic. But the key principle is this. Rather than having one set leadership style that you believe suits you as a leader or as a manager, or having one style that suits your personality, or even one style that suits the personality of your team, this is about understanding that we need to adapt our leadership style to the situation that we're faced with, hence situational leadership. So we can't make an assumption that John will always be wanting to lead his way and Jane will always be wanting to lead her way. This is about understanding that we need to understand the nature of the task, the nature of the person, and it's that in combination that becomes the nature of the situation. Meaning, as a leader or as a manager, it's important for you to develop multiple different approaches and strategies and tactics that you're going to use to lead your team. Remembering, we're trying to lead them long-term in the right direction and short-term, day-to-day, to maximize each day that they possibly can. So we're thinking short and long-term. We've got to adapt to that situation, different conversations all the time. Now, there's a number of businesses from around the world listed there who adopt this as one of their mantras or one of their approaches to management. So needless to say, it has been proven. Ken Blanchard has been an absolute guru in the world of leadership and management over many, many years. And again, they've stuck with this format simply because it works. So he likes quadrants, just like Stephen Covey likes the time management quadrant in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So this is something, just bear with me. Feel free to watch the recording again and again to get your head around this. So we talk about maturity levels of your team members, and we're not strictly speaking about maturity levels. We're talking about competence levels, essentially. So if you've got somebody at the first level of maturity, those are people that typically lack the skills or lack the knowledge or lack the process or lack the ability to nail their role. But normally somebody new to a role, new to a project, new to a task, they tend to be very willing. They tend to have a high degree of enthusiasm at that moment. They don't know how to do it well, but they tend to be very keen. Otherwise, why would you have recruited them or given them this new project opportunity? Step 2, maturity level number 2 says that they are able to do the tasks. They've learned the skills, they've learned the process, they've learned your way, they've learned their way of how to do it, but they tend to be demotivated. Now, this is something that a lot of people like to ignore. We forget the fact that, somebody starts with something with lots of enthusiasm, struggles, may fail a bit, and that might affect their motivation or even their self-confidence. And then they get to a stage at which they can do the job, but maybe they're not so motivated to do it because they got burnt out when they were in that first quadrant, if you like, or they just got a bit bored with it. It's not so exciting right now. So they know how to do something, but it just seems too repetitious for them. Then typically people move to that third phase of maturity, or M3, where they're able to do the task, but maybe they're not prepared to take on the full responsibility, which means they still want to feel like it's your task, it's your project, it's your way. So they definitely know how to do it, but they lack the self-motivation or the self-confidence to say, hey, give it to me, I'll take a lead from here. And now eventually, if you can get them through that phase, they'll get to the M4 phase or maturity level 4 phase, where they're in a situation where they're experienced, they know how to do it, so they've got the ability, they've got the confidence to do it, so they'll back themselves, and also they're probably willing to take full responsibility and ownership for their project. So when we talk to people and say that one of the key skills you've got to develop as a sales manager or business owner is the ability to delegate, this comes down to that as well. In fact, it's a very important subject to be aware from. You know, the first time you show somebody something, they're probably going to be quite keen because they love that they've been selected, but really lacking confidence and definitely lacking skill. Then there'll come a phase where they can start to do it, but they get a bit bored and wish you hadn't asked them to do it in the first place. Then they can definitely do it, but they don't want to take it off you because they don't want to have this for the rest of their lives, and they can't see someone else to delegate it to in the future. And they think, I'm going to be stuck with this for life. And maybe they're paid to do it, maybe they're not, but they don't feel like they're motivated. But eventually you get to a stage in which they say, yes, boss, I've got it. So this can be applicable to delegation. I don't think many people think about it from that perspective, but I think it's useful. So what does that mean for our situational leadership? Well, what it means is we need to use the model, or was taught in their book and their research, to adapt our leadership to the situation. So if somebody is at maturity level number 1, meaning they don't have the skills, but they're keen, then we need to be very directed in the way we teach them. So we delegate in a way we say, do this, do this, do this, do this. We're very directed. We're very particular. We don't let them think too much. We tell them exactly how to do it, when to do it, and everything else that goes with that. But we don't overly have to support and motivate and coach them. So we can be low on a supporting scale, because supporting is about coaching and motivating, because they're willing. So you tell them how to do it, lead them to it. They're probably going to get on with it. You don't have to support too much. You don't have to motivate too much, because they were willing. But the person who moves to maturity level number 2, you're probably going to have to be more directed, because they're more able to do the task, but they haven't nailed it yet. They're not fully competent. So you'll still need to be directing. So it would be medium or high levels of directing. So possibly not as high as before, but you're still having to instruct how to do it, because they've got some abilities, but they haven't nailed it yet. And you're probably going to have to put in more effort to support them, to motivate them, to make them do it, to make them apply, to make them change, to make them learn, and to make them grow. So typically, the level quadrant 2, you're going to have to do a bit more pushing, and you're going to have to hold them accountable as well. Once they get to level 3, when they've got the ability to do the job, you don't need to waste much time telling them how to do the job, because they've got it. They know how to do it, but they tend to be unwilling or lacking confidence to take full responsibility. So you're going to have to try to motivate them and hold them accountable to tell them to take action for what they know to do already. And then finally, number 4, when somebody's all good, you can back right away from telling them how to do it, of course, because that demotivates them. And of course, you don't need to hold them accountable, because it's okay, I've got them there. So you put structured positions in place where once a week you check in with them and make sure it's all done. So let's come back to it again. What we refer to in situational leadership as development stages. Typically, an individual will start their journey, just to recap, at low competence, don't know how to do something, but they have a high commitment. They're highly enthused and committed to the task. They like that it's an opportunity to grow. Then, of course, with support and direction, they develop their competence. So they develop it through practice. Then they develop it because you've instructed them and told them how to do it. You've trained them how to do it. And then, of course, as their level of competence rises, their commitment can drop, because they start to realize that maybe the task is more challenging, or maybe it's simply more boring than before. So maybe as they move to that second quadrant, they might be able to do it better. They haven't nailed it yet, but all of a sudden they're thinking, I don't want to take responsibility, or I'm lacking confidence for this. And then, of course, if you give them the right support and direction, and you motivate them, hold them accountable, and get them back on task again, they should be able to push forward to the third division, or the third quadrant around that, where they've got a lot of competence. They can mostly do it themselves. However, they might not want to take full responsibility. So again, the motivation becomes the issue. That's where your focus or support needs to focus in on. However, if they repeat the task again and again, and you just keep them encouraged along those lines, generally they'll go from being able to do it most of the time or nearly all of the time to all of the time, and they get to that fourth division and they get to fourth level of maturity, and you can move on to the next project or skill you want to develop for them. The whole purpose of me explaining this to you right now is to realize you've got to adapt your leadership to the situation. And that includes the maturity level, otherwise known as the competence and motivational level of the person that you're trying to coach or train. So there are many, many challenges that people have with this particular style of leadership. Firstly, most people never get exposed to it. Secondly, most people don't try it, and therefore they're never going to develop these skills. However, please keep these things in mind. Number one, very task-oriented managers, particularly those with a personality profile of compliance under the DISC profiling tool, they may struggle to be adaptable around their people because they're often numbers-driven people, not people. So that's really important. Likewise, it's worth keeping involved that most people who are dominant tend not to be the most flexible humans in the world. They have the ability to be flexible, but they're not always flexible in leadership and management roles. So please keep that in mind. Likewise, some managers, as I mentioned before, forget the long-term objectives and they only focus on the intermediate. So they're focused on what they need to do this week or this month or this day, and they forget the long-term aspect. Remember, some of your conversations with your team is about encouraging them to develop maybe more self-leadership, more strategic thinking that's going to help them over the year. That's different to, hey, this is how I want you to particularly do this task. Again, we get focused on the micro, we get focused on the macro. If we tie it back to personality profiles, usually dominant and influence profiles focus on the macro, and steady and compliance profiles focus on the micro. Number three, it does take experience to be able to read people's maturity levels. But as you've seen on the previous part of the workbook or guide that we've given you, it's about understanding that there's a difference between the commitment and motivation and enthusiasm versus competence. And try not to judge someone's competence and assume their motivation matches the competence. This alone, today's session, should have taught you that. Those two things can vary, and people can go from high degree of motivation to low and then back up to high again, just like competence should be, or the opposite to competence, where competence should be gained slowly over time. They're not the same thing. So in summary of today's topic of situational leadership made easy, situational leadership has been proven for decades. So it's worth exploring. A superior leader will always read their team better than an inferior leader, which is why I believe in both leadership and in sales, listening and the ability to read people is the most powerful skill you can develop over time. It's the most important thing in terms of your EQ that you can develop. Number three, better leaders will adapt their leadership style to each person in their team and to the situation they face and the complexity of the task ahead of them. Number four, the range of their style can be between the directing of telling someone exactly how to do something and supporting that's more coaching and motivation and accountability based. And for you to master the role of sales manager and of business director, you have to be able to do a bit of both. And then finally, remember, for you to master leadership, it's going to take time. Just like a member of your team, it's going to take them time to learn to be as good as you. Maybe you did that task for 3 years in a row and you got really good at it. They've only been doing it for 3 minutes. Chances are they're not going to be as good as you. But so long as they're growing their competence over time, they're going to start to move from quadrant 1 to 2 to 3 and to 4, provided you take care of the motivation and direction as you need to. Now, this, as I mentioned before, actually comes partly from our Sales Academy, but it also comes from one of our sales manager profiling exercises in terms of the programs we've got. So, if you want to have a chat to us about ways to grow your management and your capability, our sales manager fundamentals course at this stage is only $100 a month. And most people can actually start it, for $1 for the first month just to get themselves up and running. We have a more complex sales manager program that's particularly personalized to you. So feel free to reach out to us from that perspective. The best way to do that is either connect with us on the website, connect with us on LinkedIn, or simply send an email to admin@salesmasterycompany.com. The biggest thing I'd like to ask you to do, of course, is to take action from today. So whether the action is to reach out to us, or the action is to share this workbook and learning with your team, or simply to come back and go through this video again, then share it to other leaders. Let's start to adopt situational leadership as a standard, as opposed to a very foreign entity to most managers and leaders around the world. I've been Ambrose Blowfield. We're the Sales Mastery Company. And as always, take action.